everybody, Dutch Sense here. 10:45 p.m. Central Time on Monday, June 22nd, 2015. And I've got you looking at Earthquake 3D, which is a USGS feed of the most recent earthquakes. And right now we're just looking at the last 24 hours of activity, 2.5 and greater in the United States, and 4.0 and greater internationally. And what I want to draw your attention to right off the bat is that over the last 24 hours, we've actually not seen much earthquake activity. And to show you the excessive activity that happened earlier this week, we have to take it down a full 7 days to really get an idea of what actually transpired. Specifically, over the last 48 hours, we've seen two, almost three, 4.0 or greater earthquakes. Some of them have been downgraded here in the Midwest United States. Also, an earthquake returned directly at Yellowstone National Park, right inside the park, and two earthquakes struck near dormant volcanoes along the west coast. That's again over the past 1 to 2 days. Over the last 7 days, we saw activity develop, and let's go ahead and look at everything 3.0 and greater, just to see the larger earthquakes here. Okay, now you can see that the western portion of the plate and the central portion of the craton were displaced. So these two sets of earthquakes going down the west coast and along the central portion of the craton going up through Nebraska, west through Montana at the northern Yellowstone magma chamber, and then going west here towards Mount Adams, where a 3.1 struck. And then going down the west coast, each one of these was at a dormant volcanic butte. And I covered this on my blog. I'll put links down below to that so you can go check out those locations and see what's at each location in general. Over the last few days, we saw a steaming event that developed along Long Valley caldera, and that was really interesting to see because there was a wildfire going just to the northwest of there, so you could see the difference between the steaming event and, I mean, I'm telling you guys, if you really want to see what happened, you'll have to go check the backdated feeds. And many of my viewers agreed it was very strange looking, just happened yesterday. So all that going on over the past few days, this leads me into issuing a new earthquake forecast. Now you can just get a quick look at all the earthquakes that happened here around the planet. Let me go ahead and turn this up to 6.0 and greater so you can just see the larger earthquakes which occurred. Okay, so you can see the southern hemisphere moved excessively. Northern hemisphere didn't show any large movement over the last 7 days. Now the last earthquake forecast covered several of these areas in depth. A few areas saw swarms instead of large earthquakes. We'll take that as a hit. Anytime you see a repeat event happen over and over and over again and a upper 5.0 magnitude strike the same location, that's the equivalent of one large earthquake for sure. So we saw that happen, and let me just show that to you really quick with the 5.0 and greater activity. Okay, here we go. Last 7 days, 5.0 and greater. You can still see the 5.2 on there at the spot we were watching for, and the activity that happened over here to the west in Indonesia, multiple volcanic eruptions at Mount Sinabung, steaming happened at the supervolcano at Toba, also Mount Bulasan blew off, Mount Asama in Japan blew off, and a series of earthquakes have now developed over the past few days in Japan. So what do we watch for? Okay, it's been really quiet over the past few days, so where do we watch? How do we get an idea of where to watch? The way I do it, I look at the last 48 hours of earthquakes. That will help us to determine where to watch over the next 7 days. And we're kind of now at a point where a solar storm has happened, M-class flares have kicked off coming towards Earth, a radio blackout was issued, and over the last 24 hours, things got really quiet. Okay, so just a few 4.0s across the West Pacific, hardly any activity on the East Pacific. This primes us up for, well, most likely renewed activity on a larger basis because of the M-class flare activity intersecting Earth. So where do we watch? We're going to have to watch the areas to the northwest of the deep movement that you see raised here off the globe. Anytime we see deep movement, we usually see shallow follow-up movement in an adjacent area, usually to the northwest, sometimes in an adjacent area to the south. So this past time, we saw it just strike all around the area in question. We saw deep earthquakes followed by shallow earthquakes right in here in that 6.0 range. To the west, we need to watch again at our snag point. And let me zoom in and show you where we're talking about here, right where the 4.8 is. That's the last earthquake on the swarm from this past week. That's the area to watch, again, over the next 7 days. So it's not rocket science to nail this down. When you see the deep movement, watch the area on either side for possible shallow follow-up movement on an order of a magnitude, at least 1 magnitude, normally higher than the deep earthquake. So we see 6.0 deep earthquakes here. Watch the adjacent areas for a mid 6.0 or 7.0 earthquake to strike in the region over the next 7 days. We have a silent area, okay, you can see it here over the last 48 hours. No earthquake striking here. Instead, Sinabung blew off here, Bulasan blew off here in the central Philippines, Osama blew off up here to the north. Sakurajima, you can't even see it. There's so much going on there. The cameras are pretty much blacked out with steam and ash. So that's a lot of activity going on. And then look at the cluster of earthquakes over the last 48 hours all around Japan. Well, it's kind of giving away 2 areas to watch. First, the area that's standing out with all the 4.0 activity, of course, is Japan. Second area to watch, of course, is the silent area adjacent to the area that should show movement. So 6.0 should cause movement in an adjacent area to it. That will then cause a shallow earthquake to then follow the other shallow earthquake. So first, a shallow earthquake would most likely strike either here or just to the south of Fiji, right here north of New Zealand. That would then cause movement that would translate into the silent area, again with another large earthquake that strikes at a shallow level. Could be swarms. Let's hope it is. Let's hope it just results in multiple mid 5.0 swarms that kick up instead of a single large earthquake. But then look at Japan. So we're back at it again, guys. A solar storm has just occurred. We see a cluster of earthquakes at Japan. Let's turn down the ring so we can actually see Japan, since there's so many of these. Right along the Izu Ridge. Literally almost a straight line going due south. Also, a few earthquakes down here to the south. Again, south of Sakurajima, which is right here, Sakurajima, south of there. And going south towards Okinawa, right here. And then down towards Taiwan, right there. So the earthquakes have kicked off down through here. This means, look at all the 4.0 activity. All across the entire trench, all pretty much at the same depth. It's kind of pointing towards an area to watch, 2 areas to watch. Again, silent areas in between the 2 areas that are showing major movement. This brings us down towards Tokyo. Again, that brings us down towards South Japan right here. And it brings us far north Japan, up here just to the north, maybe the Kuril Islands, south through Hokkaido. So 2 areas to watch. I wouldn't be surprised if we did see movement in between these 2 areas, so don't rule out the in-between area. It's a pretty small area to watch. Central to North Japan. Again, silent area in central South Japan right here, going north up into North Japan. The signs are there for movement. The solar storm has hit. Next 7 days should tell the tale. The cluster is already there, giving away the area to watch, okay? Hey everybody, Dutch Sense here, 11:19 a.m. Central Time on Tuesday, June 23rd, 2015. And I didn't get a chance to process this up last night, recorded the video, went to bed, and now, today, before I could get the video out, just want to add this in, I'll put this right in the middle of the video, a 6.3 magnitude earthquake struck the Izu Trench, right along the Izu Trench. So, there we go, guys. Again, 6.3 magnitude struck right in the area we were watching, and that's just south of Tokyo, right along the trench, right in the area warned. Just thought I'd name that out for you here, show you guys that one earthquake already hit before I could even get the video out. So, we still have to watch over the next 7 days. This is just a sign, again, the level of this, the depth of this earthquake is fairly deep. This is down in the asthenosphere below the plate, which means we need to watch adjacent areas to this area for larger movement over the next 7 days. Much love, guys. Further west, again, we've seen earthquakes progress across Siberia and China, terminating at the Turkmenistan-Afghanistan border now, west of Nepal. What does this mean for the next 7 days? The area in between the termination point and the area that's going to show movement in Japan should show some kind of larger activity. Again, we can hope for a swarm of 5.0s, but I wouldn't rule out a larger single earthquake to strike at the India border. And this would be, again, down here and somewhere in southeast India, somewhere in this region here along India, but most likely to the southeast. We won't say Nepal because that area has already showed excessive movement. There's going to be follow-up movement, and that will follow up this Pacific Plate activity that we're seeing here now. No activity further west than there over the last 2 days. To see the activity in Europe over the last 7 days, Okay, we have our cluster spot at Turkmenistan, complete silence to the west. Now, either they're not reporting earthquakes, which could be a possibility, but the activity that we would see, smaller-wise, has not occurred. Nothing in that 4.0 range. Let's go ahead and turn on the European agency. This will just show us pretty much today's earthquakes. Okay, this is the last 50 earthquakes on the EMSC feed, and you can see some smaller movement down here to the south. We have a few cluster spots that are giving away the area to watch for larger movement. So we're talking about the area just east of here, where you see this cluster here. Watch the area around the Caspian Sea. That's this body of water right here. The area near the Caspian Sea should show either one single large event or a swarm of events. Why? Because the pressure is going to be coming from the Pacific Plate heading towards Europe in this direction, from the east to the west. Okay? And that then terminates here in South Europe. So once we see movement near the Caspian Sea throughout the week down here to the south, this means we need to watch North Italy. The area in North Italy is the area to watch over the next few days for possible larger movement. Why? Because when you see the smaller movement, the cluster spots, the areas that are silent, that are normally prone, should show activity. Over the last 7 days, there was a 3.0 that struck here in Poland. Rather rare. We were watching for Poland movement. Poland got hit. Also, the series of 4.0 and greater earthquakes that struck North France, South England, East England over the last several weeks. So when you see that kind of movement happening up here in North Europe, nothing happening in North Italy when we saw multiple 6.0 and greater earthquakes strike in 2011, 2012. People were killed there in North Italy in those earthquakes, and we haven't seen anything there since. So that puts North Italy, north of Rome, south of Switzerland, somewhere in this region here should show movement, and it should be rather large in the next 7 days because the activity has built to that point. Going further west, we need to watch again along the south-central mid-Atlantic ridge. Let's go back over to the USGS feed and look at the last 7 days. And I'll explain why we need to watch and where. So it's a pretty large area. We can nail it down to a small spot. Okay, down here to the south, you can see going all the way down to the South Sandwich Islands, the 5.7 here. But the one that stands out is the 7.0 that struck along the mid-Atlantic ridge at an undersea volcano. And to see that, we would have to go over to Google Earth. But you can go check it out. You can get the coordinates from the USGS, put them in on Google Earth, go check that out. But there's an undersea volcano there. It's an old, obviously, undersea volcano of some kind. And we should then see movement strike somewhere along the central mid-Atlantic because the movement to the south is shown. No compensation to the north. So the area that'll move will be the next spot up the ridge, and that is, of course, at the bend right here east of Brazil and, of course, west of West Africa and Sierra Leone. So we have the area somewhere in this region here, and it'll be in that 6.0 range, so it shouldn't cause any kind of tsunami, shouldn't cause any kind of large damage of any kind. That will be out to sea. Most likely nobody will even report on it. Now, why would it be in the 6.0 range? Look to the south. 6.0 range, again, 5.7. That should compensate to the north. Okay, same movement should translate out in both directions, up and down the mid-Atlantic ridge, because the areas are moving laterally. That puts pressure down to the southwest down here. You can imagine the plate moved down this direction, put pressure here, and it also moved up this direction. So it should go somewhere right in here over the next 7 days. Further to the south, Chile, look at the earthquake activity down here. Okay, we have an area that we need to watch now. That's the area to the north, the silent spot. That's Peru. That's the area right here. This will be along the coast of Peru, and it should possibly be in that multiple 6.0 range. Won't just be one large earthquake. Most likely will be a series of earthquakes that strike Peru over the next 7 days. That will then alleviate the pressure in the area here to the south. Getting back towards Central America, and we'll get into the United States in a second here, what to watch over the next 7 days. Throughout Central America, let's turn down these earthquakes so we can get a better idea of what's going on. First of all, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, you've been back swarming out again. And we see that happen time and time again. You're at that middle point, that fulcrum between the two plates, and it seems to go over and over again at multiple depths. Not producing very large earthquakes. We had the Haiti earthquake several years ago that struck just west of Dominican Republic. So you can see This earthquake here, there's a 4.3. Anytime we start seeing 4.0 and greater earthquakes strike Dominican Republic, that lets you know that the area here in Central America is in serious flux. Look at the area to the west, all on the coast, a whole cluster. And 2 more over here to the east. Let's turn off the smaller earthquakes so we can just see the larger events. Okay, 2 4.3s, one at a deeper level, one at a more shallow level. Again, the higher these are off the planet, the deeper they are into the Earth. That's an earthquake 3D feature. 1 single earthquake down here in Colombia, yet again, rather rare, and then a whole cluster up the west coast of Central America. Terminating up here in Baja, Mexico again, ironically, as that tropical storm passed over. So, when you see the activity down here to the south, how do we nail it down? Sure is a large area to watch. Well, the area that's silent, the area in between the 2 areas showing multiple 4.0 earthquakes, should show some kind of earthquake activity in a larger fashion than what's currently happening around the area. Where does that put us? Well, it puts us just south of Cuba for some kind of large earthquake activity that would be above the 4.0 activity that we're seeing here now. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be a tsunami or anything, but we may see a 5.0 type earthquake, maybe upwards of a low 6.0. Let's hope it stays down low, but it should strike in between this region here, okay? And now back to the United States. Let's just name it out. Where do we watch along the west coast? This is going to be pretty hard to nail down because there hasn't been any activity along the west coast, really, for us to base this upon in the last 24 to 48 hours. Very little activity, just a few. So, when you see the last 48 hours of earthquakes, you see a small cluster of west coast activity and a rather noteworthy cluster of activity at the fracking operation throughout Oklahoma. What does this mean? Well, if you trace this down, this is the deformed edge of the craton, almost exactly. So the deformed edge has been displaced and the southern edge has been displaced of the craton. This means we should see movement to the southwest. Why? Well, almost like an arrow pointing to the south, well, the activity has progressed down the west coast, okay, displacing the deformed edge of the craton. This then should put pressure down here to the south. Where? This would be near Salton Sea, possibly San Diego. Los Angeles is just a little bit further north, so between Los Angeles and Salton Sea, we should see some kind of noteworthy movement over the next 7 days. Now, this forecast is slightly different than past forecasts because in the past, we've watched up here to the northwest based upon activity that happened at dormant volcanoes. Well, the pressure should have built down here to the south over the past few days. Over the last 7, again, look at that. Okay? So it all stems from the swarm of earthquakes that happened off the coast of Oregon about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. That then displaced the entire craton here. The central portion moved. Baja moved. And you can see in red here the darker earthquakes. The darker red they are, the older they are. So the lighter earthquakes are, of course, the younger earthquakes. So these all happened over the last 7 days. And then over the last 2, hardly any. Just a small cluster down here to the south. So we have to watch just to the south of the cluster for some kind of compensation movement. Up here in the far Pacific Northwest, we can rule out pretty much Washington State. So Washington State, throw you out of the window for any kind of large earthquake. British Columbia, we should be able to throw you out as well. Why? We're now looking back up here off the coast of Alaska for another large earthquake. And this would be due east of the area that just showed the 6.8. And we're still seeing swarms here now. But that just happened 3 weeks ago, I think. The area just to the east of there should show compensation movement, especially because we saw all the earthquakes strike up here in North Canada over the last week. We had the fracking operation, the 4.0 that struck in Alberta, and then now the 4.2. Can't really determine what's there. Satellite imagery, rather poor. But to see them both strike in North Canada lets us know that the area along the coast of Alaska, going down here into British Columbia, okay, so we're talking just a little bit north of Vancouver. So that takes us out of the United States, up into Alaska. Well, I guess Alaska is the United States, but up into North Canada, right along the coast, and that brings us right up into this region here. So that's slightly different as well than what we would normally issue for a forecast. Also, almost like an arrow pointing towards that direction, you can kind of see it, but that then kind of terminates up here with that 4.2 up on the far northwest portion of the North American craton. So it's all kind of reset over the past few days, and that explains why things quieted off. With the new solar storm interacting with the Earth right now, that means the time for go is going to be in the next few days, and so we should see an intense kick-up of activity in the next few days. If it doesn't happen, I'll be surprised. So guys, I would like to stress, always have an earthquake plan ready and be prepared. You can also overlap your earthquake plan with severe weather and civil unrest and other things. You can make all those plans combined into one. Okay? Be safe, guys. Much love.